The first thing Jake Hollister saw was something dark lying in the middle of the grass. At first, he thought it was a dead deer, the kind that sometimes wandered too far from water and paid the price under the Kansas sun. But when his horse stepped closer, Jake froze right there in the saddle. It was a woman, a young nun in a black habit, stretched out flat beneath the burning sky. Jake swung down so fast the dust jumped up around his boots. He dropped to one knee beside her, heart thudding. Her feet were bare, cut and filthy, every toe streaked with dried blood. The habit clung to her, stiff with sweat and sun-baked cloth, carrying the sharp smell of heat and fear that told him she had been running a long, desperate way. Jake touched her wrist. The skin was burning hot, the kind of heat that came from miles walked with no shade and no mercy. Her lips moved. At first he thought it was just the wind brushing the grass, but then he leaned closer. "That is forbidden." The words were barely there, trembling like she was afraid even to let them escape. Jake had lived 52 hard years, through droughts, gunfights, and winters that buried cattle alive. But he had never seen a nun collapsed alone on the prairie with terror written so clearly across her face. Her eyes opened halfway, blue and unfocused, scared and lost. Underneath that fear was something older, something that had been carried too long. Jake lifted her head gently, feeling the fever roll off her skin. When he touched her shoulder to check for injuries, she whispered it again. "That is forbidden." Not a warning, a plea. And Jake understood. She was not afraid of him. She was afraid of rules, of judgment, of whatever punishment waited for a nun who let a rancher lay a hand on her, even if it was to save her life. He dipped his bandana into his water skin and laid it across her forehead. She flinched, then slowly relaxed, melting into the cool like it was the first kindness she had felt in days. Far off, hooves sounded. Jake knew if someone found her like this, lying in his arms, it could ruin her. Maybe him too. He slid one arm beneath her knees and one behind her back and lifted her carefully. She leaned into his chest without strength to resist. As he carried her toward his horse, one question kept circling his mind. What could be so forbidden? It drove a young nun into the middle of the Kansas prairie. Jake rode slow, one arm steady around her so she would not slip. She stayed quiet, breathing shallow, her head resting against his chest like she trusted him without knowing why. By the time they reached the creek near the Hollister ranch, Jake realized something strange. She had not fought him, not even when she stirred and saw she was being carried by a man she had never met. Her fingers only tightened in his shirt, like she was holding the last safe thing left in the world. He carried her into his can, a simple place with wooden walls, a pot on the stove, and a Bible on the table he did not open as often as he should. He laid her on his bed and cooled her forehead again with a wet cloth. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to take in where she was. Relief crossed her face, slow and careful, the kind that came when danger finally loosened its grip. He gave her water. She took a sip, then another. "Where am I?" she whispered. "Hollister Ranch," Jake said, pulling up a chair. "Few miles west of Dodge City. You passed out in the grass." She nodded, like she already knew she had gone too far. When he asked her name, she hesitated, guarding it like a secret, then whispered, "Sister Elise." She tried to sit up, but Jake held her shoulder gently. "Take it easy. No one's coming for you here." Fear flashed in her eyes, sharp and quick, not fear of him, but of being found. She swallowed. "Jake, if they ask about me, you must say you never saw me." Jake leaned back, studying her. "They who?" She looked toward the door like someone might step through it any second. "Didn't run from God," she said softly. "I ran from the people inside the church." Jake felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. Running from God was one thing. Running from the church itself was something else entirely. He told her she could speak, that no one else was there. Her hands shook as she told him about the mission in Dodge City, about how things there were no longer holy. There was a man everyone respected, she said, but he was hiding rot behind a cross. She found letters, books full of numbers that did not add up. She told an older sister, and the next morning that sister was gone. They said she left on her own, but Elise saw the sheriff with Father Whitlock that same night. After that, Elise said, the watching started. Questions about where she slept, where she prayed. Jake felt anger rise, slow and heavy. Sheriff Collins was not a man he trusted. Elise knew if she stayed, she would disappear too. So she slipped onto a freight wagon, rode it as far as the river, and walked until her legs gave out. That was how Jake found her. When she finished, her voice broke and the tears finally came. Not loud ones, just the quiet kind that came when someone had held everything in too long. Jake stayed where he was, letting her cry. He told her about his wife, about the day he stayed silent when he should have spoken, and how that silence followed him every day since. If you're brave enough to speak, he told her, I won't let you stand alone. 2 mornings later, they rode toward Dodge City together. Jake gave her an old trail hat, sun-faded and big enough to hide half her face. The prairie stretched wide and golden, heat already rising. When the town came into view, Elise's grip tightened on the saddle. The mission stood quiet and clean, like it had never known sin. Sheriff Collins waited near the entrance, smiling slow and oily. You bringing her back where she belongs? He asked. That depends, Jake said. You plan on telling the truth today? Father Whitlock stepped out then, calm and cold, calling Elise to come inside. She stepped back. Jake stepped forward. The air tightened, sharp as a storm about to break. Collins' hand drifted toward his gun. Elise, his knees buckled, but Jake held her steady. I'm not going inside, she said. Not today. Not ever again. Voices rose. Some defended the priest. Others hesitated. Elise spoke of the books, the lies, the ones who vanished. A storekeeper stepped forward, unpaid bills on his tongue. A mother spoke of a daughter who never came home. The truth spread fast once it had air to breathe. Jake looked at the faces around him, some angry, some scared, some just tired of being fooled. Trust only works if a man earns it, he said. Collins cursed and drew his gun. The shot went wild when 2 men slammed into his arm. In the chaos, Whitlock tried to flee, but townsmen tackled him at the door. Papers spilled, ledgers burst open. Money meant for orphans lay scattered across the floor. No one needed a judge to explain what they saw. By sunset, Collins sat in his own jail, and Whitlock was taken away by men no longer afraid of him. Elise stood in the doorway of the mission, no longer a runaway, but the woman who brought light into a dark place. Elise stayed, working beside the other sisters, setting things right. Records were sorted. Hungry mouths were fed. Every Saturday evening, Jake rode in and waited by the fence. She still wore her habit. She still hadn't. He decided about her vows, but both of them knew something had begun that day in the grass, when a worn-out rancher refused to let a worn-out nun disappear. Some kinds of love do not shout. They just wait, steady and patient, until the day someone is ready to step into the light.